And Aaron is going to chair the next session, the Web in the Middle East. Aaron is the director of the Delphina Foundation. He sits on numerous boards and committees and advisory groups such as All Change Arts, Shubak, Davidoff Arts Initiative, the Caspian Arts Foundation, the Young Arab Theatre Fund, Marrakesh Biennial, and the Jarman Awards 2012, amongst others. Are there any others you could fit in, Aaron? I don't know. And he has a degree in economics and dance from Princeton University, a postgraduate degree in creative industries from King's College London. A lot of the Delphina Foundation, which I'm sure he'll mention, has been looking at working with artists right across the Middle East region, and so inevitably has become an expert, kind of by default really, perhaps, on this whole area of digital dissent, since that arose as such a kind of worldwide issue so recently. I'm going to hand over to you, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel, Digital Dissent, the Web in the Middle East. We're going to be joined by two colleagues from the region on Skype, so we're praying that the technology does work with us. So again, I'm Aaron Cesar from the Delphina Foundation in London, and Delphina Foundation operates as a think tank for artists and contemporary practice, bringing artists and alongside activists, architects, sometimes chefs, to look at some of the critical issues that we face in kind of the world today. Over the last 7 years, we've worked very closely with the Middle East and North Africa, inviting more than 150 artists in residence in London as part of our programs. One of the ongoing themes of our work at Delphina Foundation has been looking at the public domain and how the internet and social media have expanded the notion of the public sphere from the physical to the virtual. Although the notion of the public and public space have traditionally been associated with the idea of collective interest and also civic participation, such spaces, be they civic squares or computer screens, have been under increasing privatization and also surveillance, with institutional powers obsessed with security and control throughout the world. Yet and still, we have experienced these moments when physical and virtual publics have collapsed into one. A protest starts with a tweet, a Facebook or Instagram posting fuels a revolution. The so-called Arab Spring was one of these such moments. In 2011, the web and social media in particular was touted as a key component of the uprisings that swept countries across the Arab region, when mass demonstrations led to political unrest, which eventually brought down some of the long-standing regimes. During the Arab Spring, there was an immense power of images and videos that were often captured on mobile phones rather than by television networks, that were broadcast on YouTube rather than traditional media, which boosted the confidence of protesters and also communicated their stories to the world. Artists and activists like Mozarine Collective, who we had a chance to work with at Delphina Foundation, collected these images and shared them across the internet, but also in public spaces like the cinema in Tahrir Square. And Mozarine's Collective YouTube channel was one of the most watched non-commercial channels on YouTube in the world in January of 2012, and also it continues to be one of the most popular channels in Egypt. Social networking and blogs were equally as important to citizens and to activists so they could share strategies about protests, from Tunisia to Egypt to Syria. While history will place the internet as a key component of the Arab Spring, it will also document the day that the internet stopped working. This was the 27th of January, when the Mubarak regime pulled the plug on the internet in Egypt. And I think it's the first publicized case of the internet being forcibly shut down. Now, what the whole internet switch-off demonstrated to the world is how vulnerable communications are to oppressive regimes, and how governments can be used to exploit them. And of course led to an ongoing debate, part of which we'll have today, about corporate complicity in supporting suppressive regimes, especially during revolutions. Since the Arab Spring, regimes throughout the region have now been seeking a more targeted response through sophisticated surveillance to track dissenters of all forms. And these dissenters include different groups, marginalized groups in society. There's an activist and blogger, Scott Young, who classifies these people as labor activists, atheists, feminists, Shiites, kids with foreign friends, and just generally sarcastic people are being called dissenters. And all of this is for the sake of security. Now, it should be pointed out that Arab governments were always watching the internet. I mean, the previous session with Reem, who's joining us by Skype, talked about censorship in the region. And in fact, much of the unrest across kind of the Arab world perhaps would have been contained if such technologies were employed by governments at a quicker rate. So for example, Tunisia, which is the first country to revolt, as many of you will know, was also one of the first countries to start using the internet around 1996. And it was one of the most controlled sites for internet usage. I mean, to the point where an EU report stated it was the guinea pig for products of the global surveillance industry, not just in the region itself. Right before the Jasmine Revolution happened in Tunisia, Ben Ali and his cronies were actually planning a more sophisticated surveillance technology that would have actually tapped into social networks. That didn't happen then, but unfortunately it's beginning to happen now, and has actually, I should say. So again, all this for the sake of security, and I think that one of the things that we need to do with this panel, particularly with our panelists who are actually joining us on stage here in London, is to think about the relevance to this country, which is one of the few Western countries alongside the US that's on the list of enemies of the internet list, which is developed by Reporters Without Borders. And so as Britain joins forces to bomb Islamic State militants, IS has given all of our governments, both Arab and non-Arab, an excuse or a justification for monitoring, filtering, hacking, and also tracking. So without further ado, I wanted to share with you what we're going to attempt to do with today's panel, which is to look at 3 years since kind of the Arab uprisings, and to also look at kind of the role of the internet in the region today, but also the increasing surveillance that is being employed, often for the sake of security, and also to ask the question, what is this impact on kind of online activity, but to also think about it as a global issue. I think the words NSA, GCHQ, and people like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange will all kind of ring with the people in this audience today and globally. So it's these issues that we're talking about in relation to the Middle East, which is a very diverse region, also relates to kind of this country as well. So today we're being joined by Skype, wherever the screens are, by Reem Al-Masri, who is also part of the previous panel, who is the Internet Research Lead at HIBA, by Rami Raouf, who's a digital rights and security researcher who's also on Skype. And on stage we have Carl Shuro, architect, writer, and commentator on the Middle East, and some lighthearted commentary as well here and there. We hope to bring some of that into the discussion. And also Alexandrine Perlot de Gorbian, who's an advocacy officer at Privacy International, who will also kind of help us think about the situation in the global sense of the word. So what I want to do is actually start off with Rami. Hello, Rami. I don't know if you can actually see the audience here today, but I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your work, but also how it's changed over the last 3 years in light of increasing state surveillance of online activity. So off to you, Rami.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Very briefly, my work is mainly focused on all the intersections between technology and surveillance and human rights, of course, and creating different practices and softwares and deployed by private sector companies and by the governments to impose different forms of surveillance on citizens on public domain and private domain. Public domain such as different forms of technologies that are public and private when it comes to one-to-one or any closed form of communications. And how is this used to limit people's ability to organize access to information and free speech. And over the past 3 years, the work has been developed based on different leaks or information that we are able to know either through different whistleblowers or through research or through people's protesting or jamming into police stations or exposing documents or exposing any kind of corruptions to prove different practices by the governments. And by now it's very obvious that surveillance issue is not something about Egypt or Jordan or any specific country. It's more of a universal issue with different, of course, customization, but it's still a universal thing that everyone is suffering from in different formats and levels based on a deep relationship between companies and the governments.
So, Rami, one of the kind of biggest kind of questions for us is, I think generally is around kind of the role of monitoring. Obviously there is a real kind of security issue that's out there. How do we balance kind of security and privacy?
Well, usually governments, they claim that to protect people and countries and peace, we should compromise a little bit of our privacy, and to fight against terrorism and different threats that we are facing as a regime or a country, we should compromise people's speech, privacy, and other spectrum of human rights or liberties. But the point is, there is invading people's privacy won't ensure more security, and imposing more surveillance won't guarantee any sort of stability for the country or for the government. Vice versa, it will push people to be more creative, to develop different methods, to be able to freely and privately seek information and speak and organize themselves. Imposing and being involved in different practices to impose surveillance will only expose our personal information, our personal activity, without our consent, without our knowing or understanding of how things are going, and will give the government and the others who are seeing us the ability to control our lives and control what do we say, when do we say, and what should we read, or whom even should we know. So right now, as we are talking, there might be others who are listening to this conversation without our knowing that this is going on. If you want to balance between privacy and the government's claim, transparency should be the first thing that we should speak about and be in front of our eyes.
Thank you, Rami. I think transparency is something we're going to come back to when we speak with Alexandrine in particular. I wanted to move on to Reem and also kind of pick up on the point you made in the last panel, which is about censorship. And actually about the bigger threat was actually surveillance, which of course is not only leading to censorship, but also self-censorship as well. Do you think that the internet can still be a place for dissent with the encroachment of new surveillance technologies?
I think yes and no. So there's really no one answer to this question, because surveillance, at the end of the day, there are activists who do not care about publicizing their political messages or trying to reach out to larger kinds of audience, using what the internet offers as a platform to mobilize. But then there are other people who are much more threatened by the fact that they're being surveilled and will end up self-censoring. And it really depends on the country, so we cannot really answer this question when it comes from like the general view of the Middle East, because there are it's 50 shades of authoritarianism, if you want to say that. And it's not the same consequences in each country. So maybe in a place like Saudi Arabia or a place like in the United Arab Emirates, the consequences will be much more dire than in a place like Tunisia, for example. So it really depends on the tolerance of the government itself to what kind of speech and their political strategy to contain these kind of dissent. But yes, the internet as it stands right now, it's still a place to voice dissent. It's and there are, because of its technological kind of nature, there are always tools that are coming up that can circumvent the controls that the government places on a certain kind of speech or content or information.
Reem, I'd like to also ask you a question about how or to what extent do you think we're actually able to hold businesses to account for human rights abuses that are created through these technologies? Do you think it's possible? I mean, because we spoke a little bit in the previous session about kind of the role of America and Britain. And in fact, all of these technologies are coming from mainly America and Europe. Is there anything that we can do here to begin to raise awareness of this critical issue?
I think this question is really complicated because it's definitely, I mean, everybody or any kind of entity that helped in oppressing a group of people or oppressing dissent should be held accountable to these kind of offenses, especially if they're proven to have direct kind of links to these tools, or if their intentions were proven to make these tools in order to sell them to bigger kind of clients like governments, for example. So it really depends. It depends on the situation itself. But yes, businesses should be held accountable. Businesses should be more transparent when it comes to their markets. So you might say that businesses cannot control how their softwares or programs are being used because sometimes they're designed for legitimate reasons. But you can say that businesses should be transparent about who are using these tools and why. And I'm sure that all of the businesses have some kind of a tracking system to where their software is being used. So this what should happen to businesses is that they should become, if they want to be more credible about their practices when it comes to human rights, they need to be more transparent on how their softwares are traveling, or how are they being used, whether when it comes to governments or even to other kind of businesses. So this is one, but then it's not only about export or import control, it's also about governments like the UK or the US being held accountable for the things that they are doing to their own people. So if you want to have legitimacy over export and import control over the software that is being produced in your own backyard, then you need to investigate how is it being also used in your own country. And it should not be political, because when you look at like the export-import controls, nobody really gave attention to how the Israeli products are being used in the occupation of Palestine and on the occupation of Gaza, for example. But then all the argument is more focused about how authoritarian regimes are using it against their own people. And this is, for me, if this argument do not fall on each government and each player the same way, then it's kind of politicized. And these standards should fall on any kind of entity that uses these products, whether when it comes to occupying another state or whether when it comes to using them against their own people.
Great, thank you, Reem. I want to move on to Carl, because I want to actually ask Carl, are we sleepwalking into a surveillance society? In 2006, you wrote this incredible article, which I'd have to look through my notes to get about, but it was about basically the rise of CCTV cameras in the UK and how we're all just willingly accepting them and not really causing any major kind of protests in regards to them. Could you relate kind of what these guys are experiencing there to what's actually occurring here, too?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to kind of quickly try to respond that, but give a bit of a background. I'm a Lebanese blogger based here in London. And one thing I want to mention is blogging has given me a great platform, not a voice, but a platform. And a lot of other people across the Arab world and in Lebanon, we've been able to challenge traditional media. So I'm quite positive about it, but I'm skeptical about the nature of the discussion when we move it away from a wide principles-based to a kind of fetishized view of the internet specifically. So for example, talking about the notion of digital dissent, for me is highly problematic in a complex region like the Middle East, where it's intertwined with the politics of the area. So just kind of isolating that has its pitfalls. The second aspect that I want to talk about is we have to always constantly relate that to the broader issues of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So the other attack that we clearly see in this country, other than the attack on the internet, is the attack on traditional media. And unfortunately, in terms of, let me just explain, in terms of kind of restriction, the freedom of the press, under the guise of public good, which is highly dubious, because to me it's always the idea is to give the maximum freedom to people, and I see that happening in traditional media, but also in the internet. So I believe in a completely unregulated digital sphere, and I understand that that comes with its pitfalls. And if you specifically look at the Middle East, for example, one of the most successful groups, which you've mentioned, in terms of utilizing that medium to put across their message and recruit is ISIS, or the Islamic State. Even that isn't, to me, a reason to control the internet, because we can challenge these people. If we had the freedom, we can challenge that. But I'm arguing we shouldn't move that and fetishize it and become only obsessed with our own sphere, which is the digital sphere, and then lose sight of the bigger picture. We're getting all these kind of messages that feed into that surveillance society. So you look into things like when we were being warned after 7/7, you have to be vigilant, or after 9/11, and encouraging suspicion of other citizens and sort of outsourcing the functions of monitoring and surveying people to us, the citizens, and unfortunately many people were internalizing that. What I want to kind of sum up with is the proper, healthy response to that is to say we are principally committed to the values of free speech and freedom of expression. Let's not allow these kind of problems that might be technical, that might be political, that might be kind of security related, to become obstacles towards realizing that ideal and giving us all the voice and the ability to kind of compete with our ideas in the public sphere. I think that's the main point that I want to kind of emphasize in this discussion.
Are there any exceptions to this rule?
Well, look, there's obviously, you know, people that that can take advantage of, particularly the online sphere. You get like pedophile rings, for example, right? And you always get faced by that. But my answer would be, these guys are breaking a law. That's a very clear law. They're engaging in an activity that's regulated by other sets of laws. Let's not start creating exceptions and creating public kind of fear-mongering and moral panics around what is ultimately a very small group of people, and end up sacrificing major freedoms. You know, even to me, the question of hacking, there shouldn't be qualifiers in that. People would do that in order to reveal some sort of information. They break the law, they know they might face the consequences, and then it's about whether they think it's kind of important enough to reveal that truth. So let's not create moral panics that would justify that kind of censorship and start creating a set of exceptions that then mushroom into a completely controlled public sphere.
Thank you so much, Carl. I want to bring in Alexandrine from Privacy International to talk about the role of advocacy in all of these issues, and also your relationship with Rami and Reem, who I know you work with intimately, closely.
Thank you for having me on such a wonderful panel. I'm really happy to be with them today. I think
it's fantastic, right?
Not sure what's happening outside.
No, it's actually on Skype.
Oh,
it's actually happening
Skype.
in Cairo
Okay.
or Amman, one of the two.
But one of the issues I wanted to raise today, and it's linked to the work that Privacy International is doing, is to challenge Western democracies to acknowledge the role that they're playing, their implications in the use of surveillance technologies that we've been talking about, and it's reaffirming the points that Reem was making, that as British, European, American citizens, we should be concerned about the decisions, the policies of our own governments to allow such technologies to be exported to countries where they will be used to enable human rights abuses. because we have to face it, these technologies can play a dual role, but we know, we have evidence that they're being used to violate human rights in these countries. And one of the approaches that we've been taking is to work on the export and import control policies and practices of our governments here in the West. And it's not the only solution, but for us it's really a starting point to understand better where the technology is coming from, who's designing it, who's selling it, and who's buying it. For us, it's just the first step to be able to investigate further those companies, the countries buying and the countries buying, and we can see what the consequences are of the use of such technologies.
Because it is a $5 billion industry.
Exactly. And the reason why we're working on this issue is, one, to regulate the export of this industry. But it's also to encourage a moral responsibility of not only our governments, but also of private companies, and to prevent them fueling and empowering repressive regimes across the world. And that's something that we've been very challenged ourselves here in the UK, with a government who refuses to confirm or deny that they are carrying themselves mass surveillance. So how can we have such a debate in the UK and in Europe where our own governments refuse to be transparent and accountable to their own practices and to their own complicit activities against their own citizens? So that's something that we've been working on, and with partners across the world in the MENA region, but also this is not just concerning the Middle East, but it's happening in South America, it's happening in Africa, it's happening in Asia. So like I think Rami said it's a global problem. And that we need to start addressing together.
I actually wanted to take the discussion back to Rami and Reem, but particularly to talk about how you both are forming alliances with other individuals and also other NGOs in the region. I mean, Rami, in your case, you're working independently. Reem, you're working with HIBA as an organization. And is there a way in which a pan-regional, is there already a pan-regional alliance around these issues? And could there be a pan-regional kind of approach to tackling them? I know, again, that's a big challenging question because of the situation in each country is completely different in regards to the internet. But I think if we begin to think about that aspiration and try and work backwards, that might be a fruitful kind of approach. So first, maybe to Rami to talk about kind of connecting up with other kind of colleagues.
Yes, I mean, most of the work that we have been doing is almost all of it, it's collective. So I have been working with Reem, with Alex, with Privacy International, and most of the other fellows and peers. Usually because there is no transparency by companies or by governments, so it needs collective actions and efforts by from our side as lawyers, journalists, researchers, practitioners, techies, hackers, etc. And it's very hard to be able to prove information or to gather information by yourself. So I do research, my fellows and peers also do the same research. We share information on knowledge and tactics, and that's why, again, it's a global thing. It's not something about a specific country or region or a specific time zone. It's happening all over the place, and it's also universal tactics. So the same things that's applied in UK is probably also applied in Egypt, most probably also applied in Jordan, etc. So because it's all the same product. So the companies that are in UK, they sell stuff to Jordan and to Egypt, and also helping companies in Egypt to come up with their own companies. So recently we have also local companies doing the same things in Egypt. So collective work and actions by different people who are involved in this kind of digital rights work is very important, and it never happens just by yourself.
Reem, do you also want to respond to that point?
I have a similar answer actually of Rami's, and also in addition to that is that we feel that there is this kind of wave across this region, and it's also global, but here, because you feel that it's kind of more chaotic than in any other part of the world, and there's a way amongst the government to actually legitimize some kind of surveillance, because in the name of combating terrorism, especially in these times. And they're using this kind of the same tactics. They're passing or the same kind of laws that legitimizes surveillance too, or try to condemn, and not condemn, but even criminalizes any kind of support that happen on social media websites, and make it more public. So we feel that it's really important to talk about these things across borders, because one evidence that may occur in Egypt may lead to other evidences that occur in Jordan, for example, especially when you keep mapping businessmen and figures and the ownerships of certain kind of companies that have ties to other companies that are based in the UK. And maybe Rami can actually talk more about the SEE company, the Sea Egypt company that
it's
was
recently won this
mapped
contract,
to
right?
Luco
Yeah, exactly,
in the UK later, out of this effort. But yeah, we feel it's important to work together.
Could I spin it back to the stage here in London to ask, what could we do to support kind of these guys? I mean, I actually wanted to get the perspective of Carl, first of all, because he doesn't represent an NGO, before we get your comment, kind of Alexandrine. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to reiterate, because my strong message is, let's not focus on tools, let's not focus on technologies. By all means, let's address these issues, but by showing that commitment to the free exchange, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, upholding it over here and encouraging people to uphold it wherever they are, I think the main political drive, that's quite useful. However, having said that, I think particularly in Arab countries where I come from, censorship in a way plays a positive role, and it might sound a bit weird to say that, but the moment the government censors you, it means you're actually doing something meaningful. And for that, like Reem's organization, Heber, they deserve to be really congratulated, because the Jordanian government tries to censorship them all the time, which means they're actually doing something meaningful. So there's that kind of tug of war in a way, that if they're going after you, it shows that you're actually touching some live wires, and then you can kind of become more persistent in that process and kind of keep up the pressure. Look, we're looking at really massive transformation in the way we communicate, and nobody has easy answers. And that's why I say kind of, it's about upholding the big principles. It's about showing commitment to that, and not kind of getting, lost in the little details. But the rest of it is part of a very big political struggle that's only just beginning in the Middle East.
And Alexandrine, from the NGO perspective, and perhaps the personal perspective, because you're also committed personally to these issues, what do you think that we can do here?
I think there are a few things, maybe more on a personal level as a European citizen living in the UK. It's really understanding that our governments have really formed what should be a tool, an infrastructure for liberation, which is the internet, into a tool of control. And it's not about controlling people like Rami and Reem and their respective organizations in the Middle East, but because of the way the internet works and it's a global structure, it means controlling your activities as well and with whom you engage. So it's just trying to take that perspective of, it's not just them and we're safe here in Europe. It has a direct impact on your rights and your enjoyment of your right to freedom of expression, to assembly, to organize, and also to have access to information about what is going on across the world in these countries. The other one, and it's to reaffirm my point earlier, and what Reem said as well, with a government like the UK who refuses to have an open dialogue, and we can criticize the US on many levels, but at least in the last sort of 18 months, they've tried to have a more open dialogue with their citizens and with other authorities within the US government to review their surveillance practices, and that we haven't even reached that point here in the UK. And that gives a bad example to countries with whom the UK is working either on security reform areas or on aid aspects. Any country that is linked to the UK can be saying, if they do it to their own citizens, why can't we be doing it? And I think on that level, the British government is really losing its moral standing as a promoter and protector of human rights, and it needs to reestablish itself with that role.
Thank you, Alexandrine. I think I just want to check with the organizers. How much time do we have left? No time. Oh, that's it. Rami, Reem, we've ran out of time. And I'd just like to thank all of the panelists. There's an opportunity to talk to us who are here kind of physically in this space. And I'm sure Rami and Reem would also love you to reach out to them and give them whatever support you can, whether it's financial, moral support. And also look at websites, Global Voices Online, which is an amazing kind of resource where both Rami and Reem kind of contribute to. There's a lot of information about what's coming out of the region right now in regards to surveillance, but also how it affects you, us here today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.